Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar today. Great to have you on board. We've got some really interesting presentations for you about what's happening in the freight space at iMOVE at the moment. I'm going to hand over to our Managing Director, Ian Christensen at iMOVE, to give you an introduction and give you a sense of what's going to happen today. Ian will be moderating the session and will be helping to respond to the questions that come through. So Ian, over to you.
Thanks, Jackie. And welcome everybody to this iMOVE webinar on progress towards more efficient supply chains. Thanks for joining us today to learn about the progress that we're making to improve supply chains using technology and data. My name's Ian Christensen and I'm the Managing Director of iMOVE Australia. iMOVE and its partners in the freight sector are working hard to improve their businesses by making better use of data and better use of information. Organisations that embrace data and digitise their operations get many benefits, including efficiency, cost reduction, reduced errors, easier to find and capture new opportunities, better service to customers, and quicker recovery from incidents. But all of these benefits can only be achieved if we allow the information to flow to the decision point where it's needed. So this webinar is going to look at several aspects of the flow of information. Better flow enables you to access new markets, to plan additional of new capacity, to automate administration, to enable your drivers to avoid queues and bottlenecks, and to quickly switch to plan B when things go wrong. It also enables you to keep your customers, or at least keep your customers informed as you recover from difficult situations. But effective information flow hinges on a few things. It requires a desire to improve performance, and that's both performance in the immediate situation, your organisation, your transport task, but also in the bigger picture. How do we make the network work better as well? We also need a degree of standardisation around our communications, around our data, so that we can understand the information that is being sent to us. So we need clear frameworks for sharing. And then finally, we actually need a degree of creativity, because part of the fun of dealing with data is that when you look at this data and you combine it with that data, it's very often possible to get new insights, to see new opportunities, but that requires a little bit of creativity, a little bit of thinking outside the box. This webinar examines all of these elements. We're going to start with Transport for New South Wales and hear about some initiatives they're taking to help us better manage freight in urban areas. We expect you'll have some questions as we go along, and please submit these via the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you could identify yourself in the question, we will undertake to get an answer for your question, even if we run out of time during at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and we're going to make it available to you all after the event. So, to our first speaker, Mike Stokoe. Mike Stokoe is Director at Urban Freight at Transport for New South Wales. Mike's been involved in freight at Transport for New South Wales since 2014, and in recent years has been leading iMOVE-supported initiatives related to urban freight. He's going to talk about some of these now. So over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Ian. Let me just, can you confirm that you're seeing that screen, full screen?
Looking good.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, thanks Ian, and thanks for your team and this opportunity today to share about the work we've done. Hope you'll find it interesting. What I'm going to do, first of all, is run through a bit of the background of how we've got to this point and why we've aimed to undertake the projects with iMOVE and our general research, and then I'll go into the three projects that we've undertaken so far. So I'll go through the first bit quickly to then get on to the more interesting projects that I'm sure you'd like to hear about. So first of all, this is a bit of an idea of all the things that are changing in global cities currently, all of which end up posing challenges to freight deliveries. As you can see there, we've got an image from George Street in the background of a truck which still needs to get up George Street and still needs to get into a loading dock, but obviously needs to travel alongside the tram and over the tram lines to actually get there. So we've got city transformation projects underway. There's changes to transport infrastructure. We've got population growth increasing in cities. There's changes to land use, which is creating challenges for freight, as freight land typically, and industrial land typically gets reclassified for some other purpose. There's a big emphasis at the moment about placemaking and creating vibrant places that are attractive to people. There's the increased urban living as to go along with the population growth. We've got a 24-hour connected society where it's literally capable to create a e-commerce transaction and hence a freight movement at any time, day or night. We too, like everyone else, has some sustainability goals about how we want this to be undertaken, and also some changing consumer trends. What that means on a more local basis, and bringing those global challenges down to think about Sydney, we've had various challenges that in our city. As per that picture on the front page, as many of you would know, in 2015 we closed George Street and were to implement light rail. That and a whole bunch of other related projects has really seen the fact that on-street loading zone spaces in the CBD have shrunk by about 20% since 2015. That's a sizable impact, and many thought the city would actually grind to a halt and it would be impossible to do things. Fortunately, that hasn't been the case. We work with various developers, and there's, generally speaking, there's a reluctance to build the full-size loading docks that the standards currently require people to do. And quite often we find that there's the assumption of people wanting to rely on curbside parking space, which, as we've said in the previous point, is disappearing. So what we also find when we're reviewing DAs as well is that there isn't really a very clear understanding of freight and what the space is required for, compared to other transport modes, where there is generally a lot of analysis done to predict what the actual movement of people are and how that's going to be accommodated for people visiting a building, whether it's cars, bikes, or passengers or pedestrians. So we've been going through that program, and then of course COVID hit, which has created some big changes from a spatial perspective in terms of how we see freight across the city. So this can be summarized up at the bottom with these couple of visual images. One problem is, well, how do we actually get to the destination and get to the CBD? What does that mean from a travel time reliability perspective? Is it going to take me half an hour, or is it going to take me an hour and a half to actually make that journey to the CBD? Secondly, when I get there, where am I going to park? Will I be able to get into a loading dock, or will I need to go and park along the street? So what we have pursued within our program of work for urban freight and transport for New South Wales is thinking about a few things. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on the slide, but basically there's a various set of drivers in there to think about, not just the social, environmental, or the commercial aspects that operators want, but also how is the infrastructure that we provide is it being used efficiently? Freight efficiency, obviously, the way that carriers choose to, they will choose the path of least resistance to operate freight. So it will be the cheapest or most profitable aspect for them, because they operate in a commercial world with a different outlook to we do in government. This next point I want to emphasize that, well, what actually drives freight? And in my mind, look, freight is not the actual vehicle on the road, it's the actual goods in the back of the vehicle. which actually comes from people's choices about consumption of goods and services. Now, of course, that manifests itself, as we typically know, into a fleet of vehicles that are driving along the road every day that do get termed as being freight. We're in an era where we're undertaking a lot of changes in the city. There's a lot of placemaking, and of course, I mean, what do people do in places? Well, they typically gather, they'll have a coffee, they'll consume, and they'll generate freight from those particular placemaking activities when they gather. So we're looking for a whole series of best practice outcomes. We've got a topic on the right there about the guiding principles that basically go through those same points about, well, you know, how does freight get generated, accommodating it into buildings, understanding the placemaking objectives, and making it efficient and meeting those broader objectives. To drill down further, why have we done these projects with iMOVE? Well, we're looking for the better outcomes. We're looking to say, well, how can we develop different approaches? How can we get efficient freight? How can we test alternate approaches? How can we deal with the growing challenges that come with the growth of freight into cities? The outcomes that we want, of course, are about the to get that internal consideration of freight, and as you can see with my background here, look about encouraging people to think about freight, ensuring that there are good facilities, that there's the right policies and approaches and actions taken by operators to accommodate freight. And we also enjoy leading the way in terms of demonstrating innovation. All that, if we can do all that, that will all lead on to successful CBDs, attractive places where freight is well considered. And there's some great examples in Sydney and other places where freight has been well considered. And the magic trick is you don't see it. So we've actually undertaken 3 projects in the last couple of years through iMOVE. We've undertaken 2 with the University of Melbourne and 1 with the University of Sydney. You have to forgive me with some of the titles of these. When we write the titles up, it's you know, they're not necessarily the most catchy things that we write. So the first one is about forecasting urban freight and predicting what the actual loading dock requirements are. We've done that with the University of Melbourne. We completed that a couple of months ago. The second one is about co-modality, which I'll come on to in a second, and that's really looking about how we can use public transport capacity to move freight. So that's one we've done with Michael Bell and University of Sydney. And the last one is a project that's underway of thinking, well, how has COVID influenced freight activity across the metropolitan area? So I'll go through each of these in turn. So we've undertaken various surveys over time. Typically, we'll use a video to do it, but we've got a picture of a couple of people doing a traffic survey. So we've collected information from various buildings, and we continue to do that. Then we had a model that we built internally a few years ago, but you know, we've always wanted to actually make it more robust. So we took this opportunity to work with University of Melbourne and Russell Thompson and his team there to get some more to get some better engine in the background of this model, and they've helped in a great way of doing a fair bit of building regression analysis and giving us a set of coefficients that can work into that. So as you can see at the top right there, there's quite a detailed set of coefficients that we can use when we're doing freight planning about the type of vehicles and the type of land use within a building. Then within the model that we've got, there's the simulated demand, about the variability of thinking about the different forecasts and the different sizes of freight tasks coming through. What that's enabling us to do is to give a forecast then of the freight task that's actually going to arrive at a destination. And ultimately, there's a user decision support dashboard that the user can play with here to actually try different configurations of freight and to get different efficacy results. So I'll just flick across to the next slide and talk about this in a use case of some work that we're currently doing. So we're currently assisting our colleagues in Metro to look at the various overstation developments that are coming up for the Metro West line between Parramatta and Sydney CBD. I think there's about 7 or 8 of these particular stops along the way. Each station is going to have various sizes of development done above it. So using this model and using this input, we're assisting them to just come up with what the freight task looks like. So you can get an idea here from the output of the file at the top right that actually shows, well, this is what the demand for vehicle spaces is going to be within that particular building. The different types of size use for service space gives us an idea of what the dwell time for different vehicles are going to be. Now, that's actually built off of this prediction of what the actual freight task is going to be. So in this particular case here, we're saying, well, it's 151 vehicles that's going to come to this particular size building. And then we go into the decision support space, so I can play around with the different configurations of dock spaces I want to provide, which will give me the efficacy results of how the building will get serviced. If anyone here is familiar with the current approaches of doing this, there's some figures which are published from that RTA published in 2002, which basically just gives you a coefficient to multiply by the land space of your building, and it tells you how many dock spaces you require. So what we're trying to do here with this is just produce something far more insightful that actually gives people the explanation of what the freight task is, as well as that requirement about what the actual number of spaces are and what the profile is across the day. So what we've also found with this is, I didn't actually expect this, it certainly wasn't part of the plan, but we've used it to really scale up and look at broader footprints of space in another project that we're doing to predict what the actual freight task is going to be for the Aerotropolis core, Bradfield core, out by the new airport in Western Sydney. So by basically using this tool, we can predict, well, this is what they've told us what the GFA is going to be by particular blocks. We can predict what the freight task is. We can understand what the actual various types of movement are and whether it's service or whether it's freight. So then we can just do some work to figure, well, it's not just going to be a vehicle that's coming in to be doing one drop. The vehicle's going to go in and start doing 2, 3, 4, maybe 60, 70 parcel deliveries around the area as well. So we can think about, well, what the consolidation task is. So this is a great example, look, of how we've taken the opportunity of developing this tool and the robust capability and coming up with this forecast. Again, from actually doing that, then we can actually just come up with what the forecasting amount of space is for this CBD space. Rattling through the co-modality project we've done with the University of Sydney. Look, I mean, this is a strange concept because a lot of people have thought, well, that's just really left field idea about putting freight on public transport and moving it. So we've done an investigation all the way through COVID, actually, of looking into this. Our aim is saying, well, can we actually take some of those freight vehicles off the road? Because, you know, as this diagram at the bottom here says, well, we've actually got latent capacity available between the peaks on our rail freight network in this particular case. So can I use that to reduce congestion, to use the latent capacity and potentially generate some revenue for the train service as well? Bear in mind, this is an investigation. This is not something we've actually implemented yet, but hopefully we'll get around to trialing it. So we did some detailed workshop with stakeholders, identified a whole bunch of what the key issues are about going to be dealing with this. You can look at this in your leisure later. This is not really so strange an idea. Look, when you actually start looking around the world, there are a whole bunch of cases about that actually demonstrate, well, you know, co-modality happens quite often. So we've got examples of it operating on trains to regional services in Japan, probably the most common one that it's we can easily think about is the fact that belly hold on planes. So 85% of freight coming into Australia pre-COVID actually arrived as belly hold. And then even when we actually travel around the train network, you actually see just ad hoc examples of co-modality occurring. In this case, a guy coming in with a trolley load of produce to go and deliver to his customers in the CBD. And then there's some long-standing examples as well, where Greyhound coaches have been hauling freight as well as passengers around the country for several years. So what did we learn from doing this? Well, yes, there is latent capacity on the trains. The best opportunity for co-modality is thinking about the middle mile, about getting from logistics land, if you like, to the CBD. So remember earlier, I posed those two challenges of what freight is. One is the journey to the CBD, one is the journey within the CBD. We think the greatest opportunity is for that journey to the CBD, particularly where it is related to same day, which we know is a growing area for freight and what customers want. We think it's there's the potential, as per the previous example with Japan Rail, to be moving the parcels unaccompanied. That obviously makes a big cost difference to moving freight. There's the growing market size of the same day expectations. We did some measurements about whether there is the market potential of this, whether we can meet it, and also the potential as well of generating revenue for train services, and also what the impact would be of reducing congestion on this. While I've got to say that whilst it's not really our goal for this particular project, there was a lot of interest as well about how we could actually apply this to regional services. So, for example, if you take this graph at the top here, well, as it says there, look, if we could put a parcel on a train at Central Station at 2:32 p.m, then that parcel can be in Newcastle and being delivered same day in that evening. Really, this particular line here that actually says, well, we have a relatively flat cost structure of actually moving that parcel for almost whatever distance we actually want, whereas there's absolutely no way that a truck or a road service could do that service competitively. So there's some interesting applications. It would be great as a next stage to be looking to take this through and trying to see if we can get it implemented. The last project that we've been working on, and this is something we commenced last year and is still underway, is thinking, well, how has COVID changed last mile freight across metropolitan Sydney? So how people typically view freight is that it's associated with non-residential land uses and also the number of employees. Well, that's kind of all turned on its head in the last year, as we've all been increasingly working from home, plus e-commerce boom that's been going on. So we've seen, as you can see here, we've seen, we've got a map that shows growth of almost every postcode across Sydney, comparing November 2020 to November 2019. So there's growth everywhere except the CBD. So we've seen a fairly substantial decline in freight volumes coming into the CBD, and yet growth across everywhere else in metropolitan Sydney. So this really is looking at a premise of saying, well, actually freight's going to, people have this demand for goods and services, as we talked about earlier as a principle. And in actual fact, freight is just going to go to where the people are. So if we're not going to the offices in the CBD, well, freight isn't going to come there. It's going to come to us with our online orders. So this is really changing the dynamic of the spatial organization of freight. It's an interesting project we've got underway at the moment with Russell Thompson and his team in Melbourne. We're exploring OPAL data, we're exploring road use data, we're exploring a whole bunch of different things to understand, well, what are the drivers and how can we predict what these future freight patterns are going to be. and quite honestly, look, we actually don't know where this is going to end up. You know, whether our current ways of working are something that's going to endure, or at some point in time we'll all just return to the office and the freight will follow us back to the city. So that's a quick wrap up, a quick whiz through the 3 projects we've got underway. They're all quite different in their own particular style, from a research or a very technical one to a very forward-looking one. I really want to, there's a list of names at the bottom there for people I'd love to just go through and thank, who've been involved in all these projects. It's been really great and insightful working with a whole bunch of people through iMOVE, through the various universities we've worked with, and also just had some strong support internally from people internally as well within Transport for New South Wales. So with that, thank you, Ian, and I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Mike. I have to say, it's really great to see the level of effort and work going on behind the scenes at Transport for New South Wales to make Sydney continue to be an attractive place to live and work, and to make it function well both now and into the future. So we've got time for a couple of questions if anybody has one. I think if I open my screen here. Okay, so here's a question, Mike. When you did the co-modality project, was it just trains that you were, metro trains that you were looking at, or a wider range of transport options? Yeah,
we found examples around the world where it's applicable to where various modes are used: bus, train. We focused on trains primarily, but to be honest, look, I mean, there's no reason, as per the examples with Greyhound coaches, there's no reason why bus or train service really couldn't be considered into that. We think there's a better application with train services. Partially, well, I guess it goes to anything, to any of those particular services. We can identify that latent capacity very easily. There's the capability of getting on and off trains. In fact, that's one of the key challenges that we did actually find with trains. And our particular problem with Sydney, I think the greatest problem that we would have to challenge in testing this is, of course, well, not many urban trains terminate in Sydney CBD. They're all just passing through. So that leaves a short window if goods were going to be got on and off trains, unless, of course, we focused on services which were actually terminating at Central Station.
Thanks, Mike. There's another question here. You referred to freight efficacy and I think also freight efficiency in your presentation. Do you have a kind of a quick definition for those things? When you talk about efficacy or when you talk about efficiency, what's the aspect of efficacy or efficiency that you're measuring and referring to?
Yeah. So the efficacy in those particular examples, like I was talking about, well, let's call it a service level. How much capacity of the freight arriving at a particular building will this particular configuration of space accommodate? So it's almost like a service level measure of the different configurations of space. Efficiency, look, efficiency is a lot more broader term. We know that freight operators are commercial operators. They're going to make decisions on what's most efficient for them. And you can't lose sight of that, because, whether we are, we might want to pedestrianize an area and not have freight vehicles coming into here, but we know there's businesses there that actually require deliveries to come in, or we might want that to occur at 5 o'clock in the morning. However, the businesses aren't there to actually receive the goods until 9 o'clock. So taking all those things into account, we need to give thought to saying, well, how are these different commercial operators going to require the goods, configure the deliveries of goods to actually do what's most efficient for them, and ultimately their profitability. That's why they're in business. But also then, how is that actually going to operate as well within the environment that the city environment that we're creating?
Super. Thanks, Mike. There's a lot more we could say about that.
Okay.
Constraints on time, I think we need to move on. So I'd now like to introduce David McNeil. David comes to us wearing a couple of hats. He's the chair of the ALC Technology Committee, and his day job is customer service, fulfillment and e-commerce for InfraBuild. David's deep understanding of supply chains has been built over 35 years of experience in the manufacture and distribution of steel products. David is a leader in the use of technology and data to improve supply chain execution, and including the importance of data standards, which is today's topic. So David, over to you.
Thanks, Ian. And probably worth adding that I'm a victim of an SAP implementation, so making my life just a delight in the last few months, but that's okay, I'm getting through it. Yeah, so today I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully my presentation will come up. Let's do it right, there we go. Good-o. So today I'm as the chair of the Australian Logistics Council Technology Committee, I'm just going to talk to the work that we've been doing on standards, and it ties in some respects nicely to the previous presentation, because it's about how we can actually get better at identifying and capturing the data associated with freight movements, and then once we've captured it, how can we actually share that information. So a little bit of so this is about work we've done around a single freight data standard through the Technology Committee in conjunction with GS1 and a lot of industry operators. So what does a standard mean for our industry? It means improved visibility of freight consignments, interoperability between supply chain partners. It aids in responding to supply chain delays, bottlenecks and errors. And from government, whether that's local, state or federal, it means that we can actually, sorry, a little bit faster than I can talk. It means that we can provide more timely information at a very granular level, and that it's going to help for better information and planning and more efficient decision making. So we've taken the time to build a number of standards over the years, and it's been a collaborative effort. The first thing was the labelling standards and guidelines for sharing of information electronically. So that's B2B messages and labelling standards. We then took part in a multi-freight, multimodal freight data exchange pilot, and that was monitoring product moving across from East Coast to West Coast, and that proved that just by working to very straightforward standards, it was very easy to get better visibility for all players. The next initiative, and you'll hear a bit more of it this afternoon as well, is the location registry, which we've been pretty proud to support. And that sort of ties in nicely to Michael's presentation about how do you actually capture a parking, say in a metro environment. But it's also, oh, crikey, I've got to take it off going faster. Yeah, it also means that we can better share location information, not against the owner of the location, along with the transport providers and the shipper. And the last piece of work that we've done, which is talking about today, is a single freight data standard. And that's work that we've done with GS1, through the ALC Technology Committee and the TCA. And it's a common set of data standards that's going to help about collecting of information and sharing of information through the end-to-end supply chain for a variety of purposes. So and give a bit of framework about the work that we've done over the years. This is not a bad little slide, and culminate about the work we've done and the culmination in the standard that was published last year. So we've worked with the GS1 very closely. I keep mentioning that, but the beauty of that is it's meant that we've had an industry standard to work to, and that is both locally, we can operate locally, but is globally based. And that covers not only the work we've done in the freight data standard, but the freight loading guidelines, the transport messaging guidelines, the event-based traceability standards for event logging, and lastly but not least, the National Location Registry. The advantage of the work we've done on in this freight data standard from last year is it brings into the conversation telematics, so that we've got a harmonised standard between the events and the transport, but also that ties back into the telematics. So it's a design, the standard is designed so that you can separate into data layers, which may be used independently or collectively, depending on the needs of the user. So a freight forwarder may be primarily interested in the data relating to the goods being transported, while another might seek to combine this with data relating to the vehicle carrying the freight. So all the relevant layers are contained in a single framework, and that allows safer and efficient data sharing. Sorry, I'm going to have to take it off the timer. Between commercial entities, governments, data aggregators, and technology providers. So it's a pretty robust standard for that. Now, as I said before, this was done the ALC working with GS1, which provided the common language to share interoperable information. But what was really exciting was about the working with TCA, because then, as I said before, we can bring into it the telematics framework, and that gets really interesting for future opportunities about using the telematic devices in road transport to pass that information along for a freight message. Now, when we did this work, we were very mindful that, yep, road's not the only freight mode, but we worked on the basis that by concentrating on road to start with, we would provide a good framework. And one of the things that we have flagged is for future work is to then broaden the standard and include rail freight, air freight, sea freight, so we've got covering all modes. Now, through this work, through this collaboration, what allows is a wide range of benefits. It helps in the collection of statistics for government purposes. It's a uniform data format that can be used to enhance the visibility of transport, better present information to road managers in a way that will help for decisions relating to access to routes by heavy vehicles. It's going to help with compliance with legislation, and longer term, it's going to facilitate planning for both industry and governments. And it's going to be able to support the full range of end-to-end supply chain users, whether that's freight customers, logistics managers, transport operators, data aggregators, telematic service providers, and last but not least, road managers and public purpose analytics users. So it's been a lot of work that we've done there. Oh, I forgot the National Freight Data Hub. My apologies. Yeah, so that's the work that we've done, and I'll stop sharing there. But, and happy to take any questions or comments.
Thanks, David. Are there any questions for David? We've got time for sort of one or two, perhaps. And while you're thinking about that, so I would like to emphasise your comment about the benefit that of enhanced visibility that data standards gives, and it gives enhanced visibility over the national freight task and all its various components to everybody that has an interest in that. So not just governments, but operators too can benefit from the sort of detailed understanding of the freight task and what needs to be done, what can be done if everybody's speaking the same language. David, I have to say, you've wowed the audience so well that, oh no, we've got a question. Is there a live element? a live element. So David, how do people access your data standards?
Sure, they can a number of ways, either by going to the Australian Logistics Council website or to the GS1 website for the freight and logistics page on GS1 Australia's website. And you can download, particularly at the GS1 page, GS1 Australia, all of the various standards that we've done through the between ALC and GS1 that we've worked together on. So that including the freight data standards, the data messaging, as well as reference information on the pilot works we've done on the freight data exchange. We're also, and it might be stealing a bit of thunder for the next discussion, is we're working very closely with the Department of Infrastructure for the National Freight Data Hub to also get representation of the data standards there. And so, probably first port of call would be the Australian Logistics Council website or GS1 Australia, and go from there.
Thanks, David. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A box relating to, shall we say, access to live data and whether there are privacy concerns or privacy aspects that need to be protected. But I'm going to suggest that we hold that question over until we've heard from our colleagues at the National Freight Data Hub, because those questions go more to the visibility over live data rather than the standards necessarily. So hold those questions. Let's and we'll pick them up at the end of the next session. So to that point, I'm not usually excited by national budgets, but this year I got very excited by the national budget because it carried with it the announcement that the federal government is going to fund the development and establishment of a national freight data hub. And that's going to provide a focal point for the collection, the sharing and the interpretation of data around the national freight task. And today, to tell us more about both the National Freight Data Hub, the plans for the National Freight Data Hub, and their demonstration hub that they've already put up online, we have Helen Guys and Matt Stockwell. They're deeply immersed in the task of establishing this new entity. Matt Stockwell, some of you might know from his previous role at Transport for New South Wales, where he helped develop the Transport for New South Wales local freight data hub. So Matt and Helen are keen to share their progress and also talk about some of the possibilities that are going to emerge from the hub development. Please welcome them. And I think, Helen, are you going to start?
I'm going to start off, and I'll ask Matt to share the slides for me. So yeah, thank you very much, Ian, for that very positive introduction. So it is a very exciting project. Matt's just bringing up the slides. I'll just provide a bit of sort of context and overview of the whole program, and then Matt will sort of go into the actual sort of nuts and bolts of what we've got out so far as a prototype website for the National Freight Data Hub. So yeah, I think Ian put it very well at the very beginning of the talk when he said that people were just very keen to sort of use data better. And maybe Matt, if we advance, what the Freight Data Hub will be looking at, and I guess why industry have been asking for a National Freight Data Hub, is that acknowledgement that they can work more efficiently, sort of unlock those sort of productivity benefits, cost savings, time savings, if they have access to better data. And maybe I might even take it one step sort of earlier than the process that Ian got to about using the data better. It's also about being able to access the data in a more streamlined way than you currently can, perhaps. And it also needs to be good data that you can access. So that's sort of that motivation behind establishing the Freight Data Hub. And I might also say, when we're talking about data, the sort of data we're talking about is probably data that lives outside your immediate organisation, or it could be a new data set that is formed from part of your data being aggregated with similar organisations to create, say, a national or a sectoral picture. So that will sort of help people with different sorts of trend analysis, or if perhaps you're not an owner of a particular data set but you need that information, then that's where the National Freight Data Hub can have a role. So if I'll just do a bit of a recap of where we've got to with working through the design that Ian has said has been committed to in the budget. So we'll just go to the next one. Thanks, Matt. So yeah, so we've been exploring and consulting with industry and governments on what their sort of data needs are and what they would like a hub to do. And we've had some public processes, and we've also had Ian and David sort of being part of an industry panel that has been meeting and is continuing to meet to sort of provide that sort of strategic industry expertise to the project. So we've had the purposes of the hub agreed to, and so those purposes of strategic planning, operations and evaluation, they're sort of the reasons why you need better data, and they're sort of across different timescales from where the operations sit, maybe on the day-to-day or even more fine-grained than that if it's some of the sort of route planning, or if there's roadworks occurring right now and you need to know and be able to see that information, to information on a longer time frame that could be used for your strategic planning for investments, and then maybe for governments to sort of evaluate the whole system performance using sort of trend information. And the way the hub is being set up to help sort of deliver those purposes is those functions of having an open data role. So that's about publishing sort of more and better government data in the first instance. The data exchange and standards, which is very sort of linked to David's previous presentation, so that within governments or from industry to industry or industry into government, when we talk about different data elements, people know exactly what they're talking about, and it's either the same thing or it can be mapped so that data sets can be readily compared, and you can gain more information perhaps if you can sort of look at 5 things that build up a richer picture than if you only have a more narrow view. And then there's that sort of leadership space that the Department of Infrastructure through the Bureau of Infrastructure and Transport Research Economics is sort of working to sort of both promote those sorts of standards, I guess the capability within industry to understand and sort of use the hub, and sort of overseeing that sort of robust technical platform being built so that people feel comfortable sharing data. So we sort of worked on the design through those different streams that are listed, and what we're designing now is having an initial focus on government data. So people, want governments to go first, and we need to build that trust that we can both put our own data out in a more timely way, but also sort of keep that data secure that needs to be secure, sort of aggregated up, and then publish sort of non-commercially sensitive information. But the hub can evolve over time to become what we're sort of explaining as a federated data sharing network. So that wouldn't be a centralized system, that would be sort of more like a web or a network where different industry groups could sort of couple in and either directly share information with one another or sort of report once to government. And a big part of that design process has been sort of learning through building a prototype hub website, sort of learning what the challenges are with the data, also sort of learning the exciting parts about what you can do with the data, which Matt will show you, and all of that sort of feeding into how we mature what we've got with the prototype with sort of more time now and sort of more resources. So this slide's just sort of centered around those 3 core functions about getting more data, more government data out in a more timely way that's also sort of machine readable and easier for people to digest. We've got sort of data priorities and projects that we've heard from consultation over the past couple of years. So focusing our efforts in those sorts of areas to begin with, and then sort of underpinning that open data by a sort of safe and secure system that allows people to share data sort of longer term. And then that data standards piece that sort of straddles all of these things, but I guess particularly facilitating that data sharing, and then the sort of leadership role initially of the department to sort of promote and work with industry and data users to sort of accept that as a common standard. So I think, Matt might have an opportunity to go into some of the learnings with some of the prototype and the data cleansing work. Some of the data we found in the historical period can be matched up together, or if we call it being harmonized, but some pieces of data just simply from the data sets we have may not have been. So that creates a sort of quite a burden in the future if you do need to readily sort of use those pieces of data together. So we could overcome that if there's sort of greater adoption of these standards. And maybe the last thing I'll say before passing to Matt is, a strong message that we've heard is that to provide data into the hub, industry want to be doing that voluntarily. So it is about sort of building that trust and creating that safe space on sort of clear terms of people understanding how their data will be used. So I might now sort of pass over the presentation to Matt. Thanks.
Thank you, Helen. Hopefully you can still see my screen. This is the landing site to the prototype website. It's made up of 4 key areas. The first, which is insights, and I'll show a couple in a second. The next is the catalog page. That goes to what Helen was just saying about our focus initially on national data sets, enabling people to find data that they're interested in, so knitting together the freight data ecosystem. We see this as a really core part of our future delivery for the hub. The third area is the projects. So this is the work that the foundations, if you like, that underpin the insights. Here we kind of explain what we're doing in the space, as well as articulate the limitations to the data set. And then finally, as we've heard from today from David and Helen and Ian, is that key data standards piece. And I'll come up, I'll show an example in a moment, but being able to link together the data from an Australian government perspective is incredibly important. The insights we've currently got 8, and I'm just going to show a couple, but this gives a flavor for the data sets that we do have, and I'll be more than happy to take any questions on any of them. But the couple that I wanted to showcase was the volume versus value visualization. This is from the Australian Bureau of Statistics International Merchandise Trades data. So they actually pull this from the Australian Border Force operational systems, cleanse and aggregate the data. And what we can see here is all of the ports and airports around Australia. We can see the historical time series for tons and value in Australian dollars. Here we've got exports selected. So what you can see here is Port Hedland, which is indeed the world's largest bulk export terminal, predominantly iron ore. And if we flick from, actually, if I just switch off Port Hedland, you can see a couple of the other bulk ports kind of spring up in the visualization. And if we move from exports to imports, you get that point that Mike was talking about earlier on, how freight is derived demand, freight heads towards population centers. So here we've got our import ports and airports being highlighted at Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, and Darwin. The other key sort of data that we can bring into this is the commodities level data. And here users can drill down on specific commodities that are moving through the ports. Now let me just see, might just have to minimize my screen a second. Oh, that didn't work. So the next one that I wanted to move to was congestion. So this comes from truck telematics data. This particular visualization that I've got up actually comes from Transport Certification Australia, which you heard David talk to a moment ago. They collect truck telematics data predominantly from the Intelligent Access Program. Truck telematics has an awful lot of data involved in it. The key bits of the data that we're currently interested in is location and time of the truck, which enables us to plot where the truck has come from or going to, as well as speed for this visualization. Two interesting facets to this visualization. I've drilled it down here on General Holmes Drive, which is a key road for access to Port Botany. What we've done is we've taken the free-flowing speed early in the morning, and we've made the assumption that if trucks take longer to traverse a section of the road than at the free-flowing speed, that's down to congestion. So at 7 a.m. and 8 a.m., the trucks take 75% longer to traverse that section of road. The goal with this visualization is to show a time series of, for example, quarters, to show how the congestion is changing on different roads, different segments of roads. And just quickly, this is a interesting sort of COVID insight. So what we can see here is the congestion, the peak congestion on General Holmes Drive hovering around that 60–75% mark, and then school holidays in January, and then the start of the COVID lockdown in the early months of 2020. Here, the congestion fell to about 27%, down to 19%. So that's come from a reduction of cars on the roads. The final visualization that I just wanted to bring up was on rest areas. Again, small sample of telematics data, but we've actually managed to merge our two sources of telematics data. And here we can show where trucks, which rest areas trucks are stopping at. So these are just formal rest areas. These are not all of the locations that trucks will potentially be stopping at, but we can start to see truck rest areas relative to each other. Now the final one that I just wanted to pick up from Helen's and David's points earlier on around the needs for data standards. So this is number of trucks on the roads, and we've actually used PSMA data to show the visualization. For the BITRE data, we actually use OpenStreetMap. So what we've got here is the PSMA road segments for General Holmes Drive meeting Foreshore Road. And for our asset registers data, where we visualize states and territories trucks data, we're using this smaller 100-meter segments. And as you can see, you don't have all of the different directions of travel or arterial or the connecting roads shown on this visualization. So in terms of data standards, showing in a uniform way average annual daily traffic, one-way, two-way, is really important. And everyone moving towards a map as a source of truth will really help us assimilate future data sets. Ian, I appreciate I've gone over, so I will leave it there and stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Matt and Helen. There's clearly a heap of stuff happening, and already a lot of interesting information available to everybody through the Prototype Data Hub. We're kind of virtually out of time, so I'm going to encourage participants in this webinar, quickly type your question into the Q&A box, and even though we won't have time to answer it live on screen now, we will undertake to answer your questions this afternoon or as soon as possible. We will come back to you with responses. I just have to say also at the end, reports from Mike Stocko's projects are going to go live this afternoon on the Transport for New South Wales web, and there will be a short survey to you as you leave this webinar. I'd be really keen if you could quickly fill it in, please. If you need to know more about any of the subjects that were discussed this afternoon, or indeed any of the other projects that are underway at iMOVE, then please reach out and contact us, either my email or Jackie's email, or even inquiries. We'll deal with it. But we are out of time, and so it remains for me to thank you enormously for your participation. Thanks to Helen, Matt, Mike and David for their contributions, and we look forward to meeting you at the next one. Thanks a lot.